And the deal that we have with our eldest right now is that he can watch YouTube if the first thing that he watches is something on Christian apologetics. And we have some of these really great YouTubers out there like Redeemed Zoomer, which hopefully I'll have on the show, creating this contact for the Gen Z, Gen Alpha, that is Christian apologetics, but it's really in kind of their form factor. I said, okay, watch something on Christian apologetics and then watch something on science or whatever else. But the first thing is you have to learn how to defend your faith, because people are going to challenge it. So blessed to hear you say that. And if I may ask, all of your 3 kids now, are they still followers of Jesus Christ? Welcome to the Revo Report. We're inspiring faith with reason and reason with faith.
Absolutely, Jesus freaks.
Amazing.
One of the things, as I was writing that book, and you could tell that Christian families' parents were concerned about the culture and how negative it was. Just all the bad influences, but also toward Christianity. And I argue, and in fact, I have a section in the book, a couple of chapters, that the culture is our children's best friend. And you're thinking, well, really? How? Because the culture communicates certain things. And what I taught them is you have to interrogate the culture. You question it like it's... Remember how C.S. Lewis wrote a book? Well, they put together a bunch of his essays called God in the Dock. And in England, that's the one being interrogated, right, in a court of law. He's in the dock. And so the atheists have done that to us for 300 years. God, you this, and God, you have to do this. Started with Voltaire, with the Great Lisbon earthquake in 1755. And God was always on the dock ever since. But we need to turn the tables and put the secularists and the atheists in the dock.
Right.
We need to interrogate them. No, you have to defend yourself of what you believe is the truth, right? Because there's no unbelief. We all have faith in something. And so I would use TV I call it the power of the clicker, the remote control. Everything we watched growing up, you could never get 10 minutes in without me stopping it and asking them questions or lecturing them about whatever was being communicated. Now I do it. My kids are grown. My wife gets all the lectures. I said, now I got an outlet in Twitter and YouTube so I try not to lecture her as much. But I can't help it because I look at stuff and I'm constantly critiquing it and how weak it is, how the secular worldview is pathetic. So, yeah, we could go down that rabbit hole for a long time. So,
what would you say? Actually, you know what? Before I get to this question, I have a question for you that I've really been thinking on. And it's this. So what's happened recently at the White House with Zelensky and President Trump? I want to get your thoughts on this. Some people are saying, oh, well, Trump is pro-Putin. He's an agent of Russia, et cetera, et cetera. And you've seen all these videos come out now about that and how, he's destroying NATO because he's a communist, et cetera, et cetera. What's your take on what just happened? I know this is not, in my official questions, but I just want to get your thoughts on it. What's your take on what just happened with Zelensky and Trump right now, and what's happening internationally?
Well, I'm honored that you would ask me the question, just to think I have something valuable to say. So if we go back to 2000 before Trump came down the escalator, Putin wasn't the ultimate evil in the universe. Even Obama said, well, once I get reelected, I don't know if you remember this, in 2012, he was caught, and he says, I'll have more room when I win the election to negotiate, to be flexible, right? At some point, after, as soon as Trump, it actually happened before because Hillary Clinton's campaign purchased the Steele dossier and all this stuff that just lie upon lie. So we now can hang Putin around Trump's neck, and Putin becomes Hitler, because, of course, Hitler was the most evil person in the world. Although Stalin and Mao killed far more, but Hitler is the guy because then he can be hung around conservatives' neck more easily. So Putin has continued to be the bogeyman, and he's not a good man by any means, right? But he has no desire to take over Europe, right? That's an excuse that they use, that the Europeans and NATO use to go to war, and they're pushing the NATO further and further to the east. And he's saying, don't do that. Stop. And, even people like Kamala Harris saying we should put Ukraine in NATO. That's a non-starter for him. And it would have been very simple if Trump had been elected to negotiate that, and over 1 million people would still be alive today. But for whatever reason, the military-industrial complex profits from war, and they've utilized Zelensky, and it's tragic on so many levels that it just doesn't have to be. I've been red-pilled about many things related to war and I mean, my gosh. So this is just the same narrative, right? Putin's Hitler, and I don't believe Hitler was determined on world conquest either, right? But so that's the narrative, though, that you have to accept it. And so then anybody they compare to Hitler is now world conquests. We got to go to World War III. And Trump just wants to be blessed as the peacemaker. It's not that hard. So that was something that actually was a good thing to see this play out in real time. And they didn't plan that because for 30 minutes it was going fine, I guess. And then, and he became this just like the Democrats, petulant little children. If you saw them last night, they're just sitting there, kids healed of cancer of the brain, and they're sitting there like this, and they won't clap.
Yeah, one of the things that Trump said was that they've never applauded, they've never stood up for anything so far, even if it was good for the U.S. Even if it was
he could cure cancer, and they would boo.
Yeah, that's what he said, right? Yeah.
But this is part I mentioned before we went on, live, that God's judgment. See, too many people see God's judgment as something that just brings destruction. God's going to judge America or whatever, and maybe. But God's judgment to me, and I'm reading through Isaiah with John Calvin slowly, and it's so interesting because God is constantly saying this bad stuff's going to happen, then there's going to be redemption. It's like judgment isn't the end. And one of the things God does in judgments, he gives people what they want. So he's given the left everything they wanted. And for 4 years, they had all the cultural and all the political power in America. The whole West, really, right? And then they couldn't help themselves because that's, again, God's judgment. And they kept, there was a vote in the Congress, I think it was the Senate, I'm not sure if it was the House or the Senate or both, against having men and women's sports, and not one Democrat voted for it.
Wow.
It's like an 80, 20, 90, 10, popularity thing, and they're still against it because they're and God is having mercy on the rest of us by letting them be revealed for who they are. And that was the argument in my book. The left can't help it. They're Marxists fundamentally, and there's just they're going to do what Marxists do, and thankfully, because that's exposed itself, and that's happening on an international level as well as on many levels.
What would you say to some Christians who are saying that, what? Because I'm sensing that there is a great awakening happening as well, right? But what would you say to some Christians who might say that actually there is no great awakening happening right now? All that's happening is that those that are Christian, they're just speaking up. So it looks like there's people converting and becoming more Christian or becoming more passionate about their faith, but actually it's not. It's just the same people, the same population. They're just speaking up right now.
Well, I hope that's true in the sense that people are speaking up, right? Yeah. But no, that's not no, there are people that are professing faith that never have before and on a level that they haven't before, So, and that's partly, we know that by the internet. People aren't keeping like Russell Brand in England, to me was shocking. It shouldn't have been, but he's on my heathen prayer list and God brought him to faith, and it's real. Yeah. It's real substantial faith. And he has got millions of followers, and he's just solid as a rock. And that matters. That builds the plausibility structure I mentioned, right? It really does. Yeah. People who are non-Christians start going, I don't know how many people I've heard come to faith in Christ because of Jordan Peterson. That he's not an Orthodox, Nicene, perfect Christian, doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. There's like, oh, wow, this Bible thing is kind of heavy. It's kind of, Tucker Carlson is a great example. He's a nominal Episcopalian. And then last year he decided, I'm going to start reading the Bible through cover to cover. And he says, I grew up in a secular world, He said 5 years ago, we would have never had these kind of conversations, ever. And now every conversation I have is about God. So there's no way you can downplay this. But I also say that this Great Awakening, and this is where Pietism, which is a 17th century German Lutheran movement, which was a reaction to scholasticism, which is simply kind of a dry, intellectual, academic kind of approach to the faith. So there was this reaction. It was eventually called Pietism. And the First Great Awakening was kind of a result of this. And through John Wesley, it basically took over the church. And you have the Second Great Awakening. But those awakenings happened in Christian culture, right? Thoroughly. Christian Protestant cultures, and they were primarily spiritual, church going and so on and so forth. This Great Awakening is quite a bit different because it's awakening to truth on so many levels in a secular, thoroughly secular culture, right? Yeah. So like I mentioned, the truth has metaphysical implications. It has spiritual implications. So people being red-pilled about their health and about big pharma and big food, and how the earth. Okay, I want to tell you a great example of how this works. I take this stuff called Beam Minerals. So I had my red pill health experience, and in May of 21, it just really started to take off. My sister introduced me to these things called Beam Minerals. They're fulvic and humic minerals. We don't get enough minerals from the soil. Well, last year at some point, I emailed the company, and some guy said, the owner would like to get on a call with you. I go, wow, that's cool. So we got on, we were talking, and she's explaining the human cell and the intricacy of it. And, I'm just going, that's God. I mean, that's what I said to her. And she goes, I still believe in evolution, but it's so complex. And I just said, yeah, God. That's what's happening. That kind of stuff, I don't know what God will do with that in her life, but you put a pebble in the shoe, but you can't deny that anymore. That's where the quote new atheists, they've lost that. The complexity of everything is saying God, 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 Romans 1, So again, I don't know where I was totally going with that, but it's, the Great Awakening, it's so different than the others. Mm-hmm. And so you can say that, this gal or Naomi Wolf isn't to Jesus yet, but that's not the point. Mm-hmm. We're building a culture, re-Christianizing it, to where believing in Jesus once again becomes not only acceptable, but maybe like something that people want to do. Mm-hmm. That's a good thing.